like a great holiday treat.
It
Game
is.
day.
Yeah, it's yummy, very yummy. So I got to let them sit for 2 weeks before I can touch them, which is the hardest part.
Oh my gosh. They got to ferment a little?
Yeah, I got to let all those flavors meld together.
All right, I think you're good to go.
Okay. So let me get there we go, my agenda back. It is Thursday, September 10th, and this is the City Council Oversight Committee. Today we have 2 items on the agenda. The first item is continued discussion regarding the tree ordinance. Thankfully, we have our tree guru, Tim Vermillion, here. Flipping back months in my notebook. We had continued, I think in March, that was our second discussion of possible revisions to the tree ordinance. Most of the discussion circulating around the possibility of a tree canopy master plan for the city, so that overall we can maintain the integrity of our tree canopy. Because when we look at tree coverage and our tree canopy just on individual lots when they come up for rezoning or platting or a PUD or anything like that, we look at that individually at the 5-foot view and don't really take kind of the 10,000-foot view to look at the integrity of our overall tree canopy. And I know Tim had done a lot of work looking at the Fort Worth tree ordinance and had pulled together some either facets of our GIS system or a new system to be able to help us kind of calculate what our existing tree canopy is, so that we can talk about what we would like to maintain it at a level kind of throughout core Norman. I believe we looked at 48 to 48. Is that correct, Tim? I see Catherine nodding. You're muted, Tim. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry, newbie mistake.
No worries.
Yes, I believe that is the jurisdiction of our existing tree ordinance.
Okay. And so I know you had been kind of doing some work on that and had gotten some software programs pulled together so that we could kind of get a sense of where we are and where we want to go. So do you want to take it from here? Can
Sure.
You take it from here? Okay.
Yeah. The Canopy Plan is done geospatially, from aerial photography. And one of the asset or the variables you look at is you have to subtract out per a given area of land all the spots you cannot plant trees. So areas like, say you had a ward that had an airport and a whole bunch of ball fields, and let's say that area was one section, 640 acres, then you would subtract out all the land that you can't plant in because it really doesn't count. And then you can look at your ratios that's acceptable, or that your goal that you want. And so 30% is roughly what Ward 2 and 4 look like. But that's just kind of a 30,000 foot view. It requires a lot of sampling, ground truthing what your spots are. Does this street actually have that many trees? And so there's a lot to it. I've done them rudimentally for all the wards to give us a good idea of what's lacking. And I've been in touch with someone who does this all over Texas, and she works for the Davie Resource Group, and she wrote all their master plans for Plano, Austin, Fort Worth, Denton. She just finished Denton's, and she was explaining to me that one of the ways you figure what is a good goal for a city is first you find out how many available planting spots you have in a given area. And so it really doesn't matter if you break it up by ward. I know we had a debate of what's the best way to break up areas. So it would be you break it up by zoning areas, and that I think would be fine. And then analyze all the spots you cannot plant trees. Then come up with what would a percentage look like in that given area. And so we just need to get it done. through a contractor. The inventory software is an individual, that you mentioned, is an individual tree tool. You go to each tree and inventory it and track all your city-owned trees that way. So it's kind of a separate issue. I've come up with 7 topics to talk about today. Canopy Plan was the first one. I would say the next step is I'm getting a quote for someone to help me do this because it's beyond what I can do by myself.
Sure.
What else can I tell you about it, ma'am?
That is, I think, pretty much covers everything that I had in my notes. Oh, we did also talk about, as a part of this plan, establishing appropriate genus and species for particularly street trees, ones that go under power lines that can grow with minimal trimming and pruning to not create problems for power lines down the road. So do you still have that kind of in the back of your mind as you're looking at this tree canopy master plan, or is that a component of it that you think you could do on your own?
Oh yeah, I've already got that list done. It's printed up on fancy stuff. But what I do is I keep them here. If somebody wants them, that way that list isn't floating in space should one of them suddenly become a horrible invasive or have a really bad disease they can spread. That way I can edit it and then hand out fresh ones.
Sure.
So that's, yes, I have that done. Now, the other things I've been working on frantically in the last 2 days is looking at my old notes about the differences in the ordinances. And I want to line out some subtleties. The a canopy plan is more of a policy and a goal statement. This is where we want to go. Here's how we're going to get there. And ordinances are the tools that support that canopy plan. And so I've looked at Fort Worth, Austin, and Denton, and a few others. And I've spoken with this lady that wrote all those plans, and she's helping me get a list of what's next. She's working me up a scope of work right now, just as an advisor.
Great. Do you have any idea, at least, of the types of ordinances that tend to go into or support plans like this? Even just kind of a couple off the top of your head. We don't need to go into them in depth, but just to get a sense of where you're headed with it.
Yes. Development or redevelopment on existing lots for tree preservation. So the more big trees you can save properly with the right BMPs and inspections and, you know, a good plan that's approved by someone who knows about that stuff can help keep canopy in areas already developed. So that's a construction, a tree preservation ordinance for construction projects. Take, for example, the Councilmember Hall's ward. She has the sorority that bought that old house, and they're saving those trees, as many as they can. So a step forward from that would be to actually have them have a plan drawn up and, you know, inspections periodically, all sorts of things. So an ordinance would take all that into consideration. And that would usually, that's typically run out of the planning department. All the cities I studied, they have several ordinances, but a lot of them are handled out of planning, and then others are handled out of either Parks and Rec or engineering or wherever the forester is located. Another one would be a street tree ordinance, which we do have. We've had one person since Berry Road, one entity on the sidewalk. We've had several, but these are the only ones that weren't diseased or hazardous. And I figured up the fine, forgetting that the max fine is $2,000. Now I made a big mistake here, but luckily it all worked out. So the fine was like $4,600. And when they saw that fine, they said, well, we'll just remove 2 trees instead of 5. And so they wrote the check and it's in the count now. But my point is, the bigger fine prevented trees to be removed. So maybe something we can amend in our ordinance is upping the fine a little bit. But there really hasn't been a lot of requests to remove, you know, nice, healthy, structurally sound trees. But it definitely worked. Also, I know that there is an intent or a wish from some on the council that they want to expand the jurisdiction of a protective tree ordinance on existing trees to outside of the public right of way. Now, Fort Worth and Austin do that. Denton does too. The ways they accomplish it are all over the map, but basically the city comes up with a list of trees they always want to have around. If you think about Denton, when you go down there in those areas, you see a lot of cross timbers, which are post oak and blackjack oaks. We have that forest type here, but it's further east in Norman. So we'd have to come up with a list of trees that we would love to protect, but there's really not a lot of cross timbers forest right in this part of town. But we would come up with a category of the highest prize trees, followed by second, third, fourth, fifth, and then trees that we don't care about, things that are invasive. And then someone
like
goes,
the eastern red cedars.
well, yeah, there's a debate whether they're invasive or not. They're okay in some spots. It's just they spread like crazy. What's worse invasive is the Callery pear, and lacebark elm is getting to be pretty invasive, but not everywhere. But anyways, so then if someone wanted to remove a tree that's in this new jurisdictional area, they would need to apply for a permit. And if say it's several trees, they on this permit application, they list out the species, the diameter, the size, all these different attributes, the quality of it. And then we have a ratio. If you're going to remove these many trees, well, you're removing a post oak that's our prized possession. We love it the most in this town, as an example, and it requires this much mitigation and so forth. And you classify all of it. Denton's, if you look at their ordinance, it's spreadsheets, it's pretty complicated, but it works well. And then you come up with a final, okay, your plan is approved, assuming that you do all these things. So that's kind of how they work. There are appeals processes, there are credits given for different things. You can sometimes, in lieu of that, pay a fee that goes into a tree planting program, in lieu of replanting trees. Mm-hmm. And these things happen on the jurisdictions on these things are a little different in the different cities. I don't know it down to that fine detail, but it does happen on private property. It happens on commercial property. It happens on all different kinds of property. And I know it's controversial, but if those are the wishes I'm supposed to research, I'll do it. Denton.
Do you think that would be effective to helping us preserve a tree canopy in the kind of the form we would like? And then after you answer that question, I'm so sorry, I didn't have my participants up, so I did not see the hands being raised. So Councilmember Holman, after Tim answers that question, please feel free to weigh in. And then Councilmember Hall.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how many people cut trees down on their own private property because I'm never involved in that. I don't know the rate that we're losing trees outside of the right of way, but what I've been focusing my time on is managing those private trees for people. Most of my time is spent helping people decide what to do with their tree that's either sick or it's about to fall over, or is it going to fall over? After the windstorms, daily I'm visiting people whose trees are, hanging, there's branches hanging over lines or whatever. And I help them find people that can help them fix that stuff. So, I've been managing private trees a lot. In fact, to a degree, the calls are coming in so much that I haven't had time to do much else. So I guess the answer is yes, it would help preserve canopy coverage. Question is, a lot of the trees I come and look at are at the end of their life. So that we really have to be honest with ourselves and not force someone to try to save a tree that it doesn't have much longer to go. So.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Councilmember Holman, you had a question?
Okay, yeah, a couple. there was a map or by ward, a canopy by ward? I don't think I saw that, but I would like to see it if there is.
Yes. Yeah, I made one for each council member, and I passed out tons of paper. Don't blame me for not having it or not remembering. I'll
Could
get
you
you a
send it
copy
to
of
us
that.
digitally? That I'd
Yeah.
appreciate that too.
Yeah, I'll send to the whole council what they need.
Great.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then, yeah, trees in the right of way have been a big kind of deal, because I've just recently on College Street, a sorority house that is under renovation, removed 2 trees at the intersection of Brooks and College that were in the right of way. And I don't know if they just did it or if they went through the city or what. Okay, good. But I mean, by all appearances, again, the trees that were there looked fine, and they did provide shade, especially at that corner when people were waiting to cross the street or whatever. So, and then we've seen the trees damaged during storms, like you mentioned, in the right of way. Some of them pretty big, like that one on Lindsay Street that had the limb fall on the cars, and then like on another one on College Street, north of Boyd, there's a newer house that was built just in the last 3 years. It's 2 stories, and when it was built, they removed the 2 trees that were in the front in the right of way, and now it's like a missing tooth in the whole block. It's like trees that line the whole street except for this one property on that side of the street anyway. And they planted a tree in the front yard, but it'll never fill in the tree canopy on the street like it once did. And so I do want to have some more more stuff on protecting right-of-way trees, or just encouraging us to replant them whenever possible. I mentioned to you the one at Eufaula and Santa Fe that was damaged in the recent storm and had to be removed. And that was just a really old one that I kind of liked. And so trying to replant these wherever we can, where it won't interfere with site triangles and utilities and stuff. But I feel like that's a real important part. And then coming up with a way to not or discourage the scraping of lots when redevelopment happens. That seems to be like the standard go-to, and I understand why. It's easy to build on a lot if you just clear it clean. But since we are seeing a lot of redevelopment in the core area, every time someone comes in and scrapes an entire lot clean, it is extremely noticeable in a real negative way, I think. So coming up with ways to encourage people not to do that or give them credit for not doing it on their development, whether it be like reduced permit fees on other stuff that involves building the house they're building or whatever the building they're building. But whatever we could do to encourage them to not cut down that big tree that's in there, unless you have looked at it and determined that it's needs to be taken down for health reasons or safety reasons, something like that. But then encouraging, the replanting of other trees in its place.
Along those same lines,
yeah,
Councilmember Holman, maybe Jane would be better to answer this question. But do we, if we just allow scraping a lot, kind of by right at this point, could we do it the opposite way? And say that if you do need to scrape a lot, that you need to apply for a permit for that. List, give a description, list the number of trees that are on that lot, their type, their size, and then actually give a reason why it is important that they scrape the lot, as opposed to just carve out what they need to carve out. Maybe Tim can answer that. Maybe Jane is better to answer that. But could we just flip the process around and say, if it is important for you to scrape, then you need to give us a compelling reason why, and we need to know exactly what you're cutting down.
Yeah, can I talk to that real quick?
Yeah.
That is exactly how they've been doing it down there. All these ordinances I've been reading. And there are some are so restrictive that there are some trees you absolutely cannot remove, period. And so you have to design around that leaf tree. So
Like that
they're
wall, is it that Walmart that has that massive tree right in the front of their parking lot?
yeah, I have seen that. I can't remember where it's at. I think Georgia or somewhere, but um, I can't remember exactly. But so, but the gist of it is, if a developer comes in and applies for a permit, and they have to, the burden is on them to provide a document that shows plan review people that what they're going to do to protect this tree, what they're going to do to protect this tree, all following the BMPs that are the best management practices that are laid out in our ordinance. And then they get approval, and all these ratios are calculated. Well, you removed these many, you have to put this many back on your property somewhere. And if it can't be done, then somewhere close by. So that's how exactly how all those ordinances work is what you were saying.
Okay. Jane, how do we do it here? And can we just reverse that process?
So we don't have anything right now, obviously, that people have to come in and ask for, a permit to clear the lot. As in sitting here listening to this, it reminded me of the application that we brought forward probably a year ago. I'm losing track of time, to be honest with you, but it's on Park. Councilmember Hall, you remember the Mr. Wilson? Okay, so they were wanting to add to that house. It's in the Center City Form-Based Code, but they were adding more than 50%. But if they followed the code, they would have had to clear the front yard. And remember, there are a lot of trees in the front yard and everything. So I think that this is a good direction, because you've seen some of the lots in the Center City area. They've gone in and they've cleared them to bring the structure to the required build line. So maybe that's something that we need to be looking at for an administrative approval, that they wouldn't have to go through the 90 days to get to you being council to say, I really want to develop this lot, but we have 2 trees, and the only way we can meet the Center City Form-Based Code requirements would be to remove those trees. So that's a start. And then as far as requiring them to apply to us first, I mean, realistically, they'd have to go. I mean, we could take the application indefinitely, but then we would have to get with Tim and have him go out to the site and take a look at the site with the developer or the property owner.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to just commit Tim to something like that, but I would much rather have us have a permitting process that requires the developer to apply for scraping the lot, and really make sure in that documentation that we know exactly what types of trees are being cut down, what their diameter is, and then how I think that that's really the only way that we would be able to maintain the validity of a tree canopy master plan. It'd be much harder to come in afterwards and say, oh, well, because you did this, now you have to do all of these other steps. Whereas if we could stop them in the process and say, okay, well, if you're going to scrape the lot, you've listed X number of trees that are integral to our tree canopy because they are so old and so large and provide so much of that percentage of tree canopy. Therefore, if that's what you want to do, then these are all your requirements. And then kind of like the heightened fine, making those homeowners think twice about whether or not they really needed to remove all 5, that might, provide a mechanism by which developers could find another way to build what they want to build while we also maintain the integrity of our tree canopy. So just kind of a thought.
So I saw Sean, his picture is here now.
He's like, all right, I want to weigh in on this.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Yeah, so during the preliminary plating process, Sean, what is there that you can talk about?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry that you have to look at me, Jane.
It's okay. It's okay. You just like appear there suddenly, so.
No, I wanted to mention, it may or may not be relevant, but I think it is, just to clarify for you all. We currently have an earth grading permit process. It's pretty elaborate. Every parcel greater than 1 acre has to have a permit for earth grading. It's managed by our stormwater division, and its purpose is to manage stormwater quality, keep the dirt from leaving the site. That's that DEQ process, EPA DEQ process. Because we don't have any restrictions on trees currently, our staff doesn't look at that, but it's
Okay.
shown on the permit. The application is pretty elaborate. The developer tells us exactly where they're cutting and filling and how much they're taking away and how they're going to handle erosion control and so on. So we already have that, and we already inspect it in the field on a daily basis. We probably have 80 of those today that we're monitoring in Norman. So I don't know if you're talking about parcels greater than an acre or less than an acre or both, but we already have the process in place for greater than 1 acre. And like Jay mentioned, typically that's for a plat, a final plat. Again, final plats are 15, 20 acres in average size. Sometimes they're 100 acres occasionally, but that's rare. So we're dealing with large parcels where the council has already approved the preliminary plat. We already know that there are going to be 45 single family lots and 8 streets and water lines and all that stuff. Trees are kind of ignored because there are no regulations right now.
Okay, but it does sound like this is something that we might be able to piggyback onto, especially for these larger lots. I mean, I do think that this would be appropriate to do on smaller lots too, but it might be, it sounds like we wouldn't necessarily have to create something entirely from scratch, that we could utilize kind of this existing process, particularly for the larger lots, but maybe downsize it a little bit for lots under 1 acre and have a good starting point already.
Yeah, the process is there. I can tell you the developers are going to be furious. So brace yourself.
That's nothing new for me. So, I'm used to that.
Well, again, they don't see a lot, and that's not fair. Many of them do their best, but they're all about building houses and other developments, and trees typically are never where they need to be relative to the new houses. So, many of them do a good job of retaining what they can, but I think Tim has seen enough here to tell you that there's not much left when they do that. The other thing I'll mention to you is that something that very few people understand, but earth farming is big business. Many of these developers make a lot of money by selling dirt.
Yeah.
So their purpose is to create more dirt, is to take more away and be able to sell it at $1 a yard or whatever they're getting that particular day. So that's another thing that goes against retainage of trees. They want the dirt. The dirt has value.
Well, I mean, considering how long it took me to get rid of the dirt for making our paver patio, that's news to me because I truly could not even give it away. So, Councilmember Holman, I'm sorry, we kind of spun off from your question. So why don't you wrap up, and then Councilmember Hall has been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I would be thinking about is kind of smaller properties that we see in the core area where the canopy already exists. And I would mention too that we often do think of the canopy as just being in the core area, but I know there are some neighborhoods even on the west side, even Cambridge has some pretty large trees in the neighborhood. It's one of the better subdivisions I've seen when it comes to trees, really. So I would love for the whole city to have the opportunity to have tree canopy everywhere, but really concerned about protecting the one we do have now. And when some of the properties in Ward 4 and Ward 7 and Ward 2 are pretty small, some of them are very small, definitely maybe under an acre for sure. And, again, just scraping that one lot leaves kind of a missing tooth effect when you start driving down these streets. And so protecting those some way, or just really encouraging them to not be removed by default. The developers, or even just a private property owner who decides, hey, we want to tear down our house and we want to build a new house right here in the same spot that we already own, encouraging them to preserve the trees, and here's some options, or here's some credit we can give you on these other parts if you preserve it, stuff like that. So that's definitely the path that I'm interested in going down with this. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Councilmember Hall.
Okay. Gosh, I don't even know where to start. I have so many different things to say. So I guess we'll just start out with, so those who live in Core Norman and value the tree canopy and trying to do whatever we can to preserve the tree canopy in Core Norman, this is also a group that is furious for the opposite reason of when trees go down. So just throwing that out there. So we've had multiple examples, particularly in not just Ward 4, I'm just going to stick to Core Norman, which covers Ward 2, Ward 7, Ward 4, generally speaking. We've had multiple examples of, as we're looking at redevelopment and new projects and scraping lots, I can think of two off the top of my head. One was the Center City Form-Based Code project over on James Garner and Sims, I want to say, where there is a very old and valued pecan tree, and it's still standing. I don't know what the health of it is right now, but this was one example of what I would designate a legacy tree or a historic tree on private property, that because the developer made choices that he did make, he did choose to try to save the tree, which we're grateful for. But this tree is surrounded by concrete and a parking lot. And I don't know what the health of that tree is going to be going forward, but he did try. So props to him on that one. But then there's another example I can think of on College, where there was another, I believe, over 100-year-old tree that was healthy as far as everybody knows. And that lot was scraped in its entirety, including that tree. And the new single family home that's there, there still is just bare yard where that tree was. I mean, there wasn't anything that was constructed on that part of the property. And I'm just assuming it was generally easier to scrape that tree and cut that tree down than it was to try to build around it, which is really unfortunate because it was huge and provided canopy to other adjoining properties. So I'm really intrigued with what other cities are doing, because I know the subject of property rights in Oklahoma is a sensitive subject, but I also know that in our current ordinance, we do have a part of that ordinance that a property owner can designate a historic tree, but that, as far as I understand it, is on the property owner. And I don't know, what we can be doing to encourage more of that. And one of the things I wanted to ask Mr. Vermillion, because I know he's been doing a lot of work in this area, because I'm also in conversation with these same neighbors of, he has done a remarkable job of identifying what I would call historic trees or legacy trees, and they're on private property. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that for just a minute, of the trees that you have identified that not only contribute to the tree canopy, but also are, unique, or, maybe we only have 3 or 4 of that type of tree in Norman, and I know you've been busy identifying those.
Yes, the true cedars is probably the most spectacular, historic, famous species of tree. And for one reason or another, a bunch of them were planted in Norman. I have no idea how long ago, but where Mr. Sutton's original house was, there's the state record is in the back. I've identified it, and I've got the state forester on board to make it the state record. We found the state record Arizona cypress right around the corner at the orthodontist house, ma'am. I can't remember the address, but it's the largest Arizona cypress as I've ever seen in any state. And there's several cedars like that. There's another one behind that sandwich shop on an estate there at Lindsay and Berry, or is that Boyd and Berry? There's a little estate that Diane Van Landingham manages. It's behind, I can't remember the name of that place. Yes, thank you. But it's right behind that, and it's a Deodora cedar. And these cedars are, every pope has to get buried in a Cedar of Lebanon casket. They were mentioned throughout the Bible several times. It's the most historic tree there is, and there's a bunch of them here. And so I'm trying to help educate people. There's a guy that wants to cut his down because he can't build a bigger driveway. So I'm trying to help get that guy on the right side of preserving that tree. And so that's the kind of stuff I've been doing in Core Norman. And because of that, if you were going to do like the center city form-based code idea, I would also like to just have a special tree protection for the Core Norman area, because that is a gem and it is even aged. And what that means is a lot of the trees that make it look like that are all the same age, roughly. And that means they're all probably going to come out at the same time, roughly. And so we really need to focus our attention on Core Norman, I think, to preserve that resource that attracts so many people to Norman. And the way we do that is we have stricter removal laws. We have a program where we focus a lot of energy and money and time on replanting, a high intensity inventory, not just a level one where you look at the tree and say what height and diameter it is and species and go on. Actually look at a lot of, does it have hazardous limbs and stuff like that, sidewalk conflicts, all those kind of things. And I've noticed that new water line projects and things in that area, they go in the street. I guess that's to prevent cutting as many roots as they can. So they were already doing some things to help protect those trees. But I think personally, it's worth saving those for sure, if they're not hazardous or sick. Alex Fierro, he's a Swiss guy, speaks 5 languages. He works at the Weather Center. He goes around inventorying pecans. It's his hobby, and he's applied to have 2 of his made protected through the ordinance, so that if he ever sells his house, they're protected. Another lady has turned in her application for her 2 trees, and I believe those are going to be protected as well. And I think I've asked several people to turn theirs in. I think they don't, because it's heavy paperwork. I'm not sure. So maybe we can simplify it a little, but there is some motion forward on getting historic trees designated. And I know part of the last meeting talked about designating certain street trees as historic. Well, the whole point of the historic portion of the ordinance is that it's the house is deed restricted so that you can't cut it down when you sell it, when someone else buys it. So I don't know how that would work, but we certainly can have, a non-binding type thing where these street trees are considered historic just because they're excellent specimens or whatever we deem a good criteria for that. But so that's one area I'd really like to help protect, some of those cedars and other good trees, and have a focused program of replanting in that area to preserve the real gem that it is.
Tim, can you send over that application as well so we can take a look at it, so we can see kind of how extensive it is?
It's really not. It's really, there's not even a form. It's just what you have to do afterwards. You have to okay. With the courthouse and this and that. No one's had to do it yet, but I'll send you that portion of the ordinance and an example of how Alex and I wrote up the application. It's just a simple Word document, but and on that, has anybody been raising their hand?
Okay. I think Lee probably still has a few more more questions or points, and then Councilmember Patron as well.
Yeah. Go ahead and finish what you were going to say.
Well, there are sections in town that are filled with alleys, and these alleys are all covered with volunteers. No, I don't think anybody purposely plants trees in the alleys, and they're falling over on. Who owns the alley trees and who's responsible for when they fall over? Parks and Recreation, we don't have the time or resources to go cutting all the trees on the alleys. Streets doesn't have the equipment to do it. So that would all have to be contracted out as, onesie twosies as they do fall over or need to be cut. So I just was trying to clear up the gray area of who owns and is responsible for alley trees.
I'll take a shot at that. It depends on how the plat designates the alleyway, where the tree is planted, if it's just hanging over into the alley versus actually being planted within the platted alley access. If it's within our access, if we have it in right of way, it'd be our responsibility.
Well, I got to figure out a way to determine all that. I guess I could get with Joyce and the GIS folks to help me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the solution. The GIS accuracy is pretty phenomenal to be able to identify the property line where public right-of-way begins and private property begins, and be able to see it from the aerial view to determine where the trunk of that tree lies. But that'd be a great way to go through the alleys about as efficiently as possible.
Okay. Okay, I'm about to make sure I got that question asked.
Good. Okay, so one of the things, just to take off from some of the comments that you made, Mr. Vermillion, first of all, I just want to say every single time how grateful I am for the work that you are doing, not only in a larger context of preserving the tree canopy, but I have just gotten such tremendous positive feedback from individuals in my ward and other places in Ward 4 at how responsive you've been to come out and assist individuals in assessing trees, because I think one of the things I really appreciate about your approach is that you are really balanced and you're trained and you're an expert. And so I think when property owners visit with you, they quickly can determine that you're not just out there trying to save every single tree, that you really are assessing it as to how it is contributing to the tree canopy. And I've heard you talk before about it's replacing aging trees that are at the end of their life cycle, and replacing them with new healthy trees that are going to continue to contribute to the tree canopy. So that's really been such a positive contribution just in the short time that you've been here. The other thing is, as far as the tree canopy and actually mapping that out, I find that really fascinating. But you did mention that wards 2 and ward 4 are tipping at that 30% tree canopy. And my desire going forward would be to, at the very minimum, preserve that percentage of tree canopy that we already have existing in wards 4, 2, and I'm going to throw in 7 too, because that's pretty much the makeup of Core Norman. And that might actually be a boundary area that we might want to deal with, because we do have a technical definition for for Core Norman. And it's, I believe it's Robinson on the north, Berry on the west, 12th maybe on the east. And I'm not sure, it kind of jig and jags around on the south side. So I know we have a technical definition for Core Norman, and I think that's primarily where the old established historic tree canopy can be found. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist in other places, but from a historic standpoint for protecting not only these neighborhoods, I believe that we have a tree canopy that also is worthy of historic designation, just as you've said, trees in the right of way, trees on private property. And I would like to see us be a lot more intentional about how we protect those, because just in the very recent past, since you've been on board, I know you've dealt with a lot of individual property owners, some who are wanting to protect their trees. So I'm pleased to know that there are some people that are pursuing that designation, and anything that we can do to simplify that process and make it as easy as possible for them to get that designation, interested in taking a look at that. But then also the education piece of not allowing people to cut down what is potentially designated as a historic or legacy tree before they have an opportunity to understand just what kind of damage they're causing to the tree canopy in general, and not just what they need to do for their own purposes going forward. So not sure how to approach that exactly. The other thing I wanted to mention, the other issue that we're having currently as we speak, and I know Mr. Vermillion has been working on this too, and Councilmember Holman mentioned one. There's actually 2 sororities right now on College that are undergoing construction projects. One pretty actively, the Kappa Kappa Gamma House at the corner of Brooks and College. And I know that I'm grateful that they have reached out to you to get some assessment of some street trees, but they also have a beautiful tree on their property that I think they've made an attempt to try to protect the roots of that tree and have tried to tape it off and, stake it and all these kinds of things. But the construction companies have not been so great about respecting that. So I think we have some worries about what's going to happen to that tree, even though those particularly property owners were committed at the beginning to try to protect that tree. So I think that's an issue. And we have the same issue at the corner of College and Parsons with another sorority that their corporation board is definitely committed to trying to preserve also historic trees that Mr. Vermillion has taken a look at, but what steps can we take to actually make sure in the construction process that we take the steps necessary and not just say, oh yeah, we're going to try to keep them, but then do no educating with construction companies of how that actually needs to happen to protect those roots. And there are ways to go about it from what I've understand, because we've had pretty lengthy conversations about this with Mr. Vermillion. So I have some really big concerns about that as well, and how we can incorporate that into what we're doing going forward. And I know we mentioned with form-based code, I'm interested in having a much broader approach to the core norm and boundaries rather than just what we can do within Center City form-based code. But that's where we're going to see a lot of new construction over time. So we definitely need to pay attention to that too. The other thing I want to be sure and mention is there have been plenty of papers written about the economic value of a tree canopy, and that it increases property values, it increases quality of life and destination for people, and that it definitely has an economic value too. So I think that's important to point out to people when they're trying to move forward with developing a new property, particularly in Core Norman, where we have so many trees that not only have contributed to the tree canopy, but also are historic in nature. The other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe Ms. Hudson, you can help me refresh my memory. So for taking projects forward for the Historic District Commission, I know that when I actually was involved in having to take more than one project forward to the Historic District Commission, we had to present a detailed tree plan and what we were going to do and how we were going to preserve all those trees. So we might be able to use some of that existing language, just like we're talking about piggybacking on to the earth grading permit process. We might be able to use some of that language from the Historic District Commission or the Historic District Guidelines as far as how to present a tree plan. And I know the Historic District Commissioners have spent plenty of time with applicants encouraging them at the very minimum to preserve as many trees as possible on their property. So that might be another place that we could look for existing language. I am really hoping that we can continue to move forward. I'm so glad that we have an ordinance on the book that we can work with, and I'm interested in doing any of the recommendations that Mr. Vermillion thinks would just improve the strength and the enforcement. So I support a fine that will really deter people from thinking carefully before they take a tree down, using his expertise so that we know we're not just making people keep trees that are not healthy or don't contribute to what our overall goal is with our tree canopy. So thank you for all the work that you put into it. I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate how responsive you've been to individuals who have benefited from your help and have already gotten the benefit of having some tree replanting take place. So you're already at work on rebuilding our tree canopy.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thanks, Councilmember Hall. And I'm taking a lot of notes kind of on next steps. The one thing I do want to mention before I move over to Councilmember Patron is I have a little bit of concern with limiting whatever we do to just the area that is kind of most formally described as core Norman, mostly because we are still seeing a lot of development on the east side of Norman, which is one reason why I was looking at 48th East as the boundary, because that's kind of our hard and fast eastern boundary for development. And while there might not be a lot of intentionally planted historic trees in the areas further east that that might be cut down, there is still a very well established and largely untouched tree canopy out that way in some of these new lots and new developments that are going in. That's where we're seeing some of the subdivisions going in, where there is a lot more of this lot scraping happening. So I think it's worth wrestling with, but I'm a little concerned that if we limit it too much or for too long, let's say we want to start just in those areas for the first year or two and then expand it out, I would not want to wait too long to expand it further east, just because of those areas that are so primed for that initial development where there's going to be a lot of lot scraping. So
Yeah.
It's not that I disagree with you. I recognize the importance of core Norman, but I worry about limiting it too much and then losing some of that eastern tree canopy as well.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I don't want to be misunderstood. And you think that when Mr. Vermillion talked about the different ways that we could identify the percentage of tree canopy, either by ward or by zoning, or the different ways that we could go about that. Oh, I'm totally committed to this across town, trust me. But that reference I was making in if depending on where we go with the percentage of tree canopy, I would like to at least preserve the 30% that we already have, that I think is pretty much within that core Norman boundary, not just by ward, and make sure
I see what you mean.
Don't dip below that.
Okay,
So,
I see what you mean. Absolutely. And I am completely on board with that.
okay.
So sorry, Councilmember Patron. If you are ready, you can feel free to go.
I am. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm just going to kind of tick off one by one here. It's a great discussion. It's really exciting to be moving down the road with this. First off, I want to give a big shout out to Councilmember Carter. I have no doubt that he's listening right now.
He
Sure,
is
if he saw it on
watching
the
right now,
agenda,
yes.
he knows what's happening. Hi, Councilmember.
He's
Former
out there.
Councilmember. Okay, so kind of just been taking notes along the way. And I guess the first thing I would say is, per the developers are going to get mad at us thing. I've been hearing for years that some variation of this quote. We want to be thriving in a planned community like Denton and the suburbs of Dallas, and how much development is happening there. Well, as we're learning here from our forester, that's very methodically planned in those communities. And one of those things is protecting trees. So there's intrinsic value that we know comes from trees. And if it's working out for those communities that these the developers and other people kind of look up to in other communities, it'll work for Norman too. So I think it's worth looking at it from a different angle. Per the clear cutting, I think, I agree with Kate. The default is we don't allow scraping. If you're wanting to scrape a lot, then there's going to have to be legitimate reasons for doing so, because certainly you're not going to be paving the entire lot. Or if you are, then there's other issues that we need to be looking at as well, which would be PUDs. So I want to make sure that when we go about this, that we're not saying, okay, here's the ordinance, but here's the loophole. You just need to get a PUD. And you get around all of this stuff. So when we go to make this ordinance, let's make sure that that the tree ordinance also applies no matter which way you've put in an application. And then let's see. For Cambridge, that came up, our tree canopy, yes. And this is something that I this is gonna come up in a couple of different of my points, but CPTC, we've been talking about a tree issue as well with Councilmember Holman. And one of those issues has been female cottonwoods. And Cambridge has a whole lot of great varieties of huge, beautiful trees, but one of our problematic trees here are the female cottonwoods. So I would like to make sure that we're incorporating the conversations that are happening in the CPTC tree discussion with this one as well. And hopefully they'll all fall under the same kind of tree canopy umbrella that we say, these few different trees are invasive or they're super prone to storm damage such that they're going to cost the city money on the next ice storm or whatever, like a Bradford pear. They're going to come down and we're going to turn around and be buying those trees from residents. So we don't want those to be falling under this because they are a nuisance tree, believe it or not. I mean, there are a lot of people that probably disagree if you're not allergic to red cedars, if you're not allergic to female cottonwoods, but I can tell you my daughter's one that suffers terribly from the cottonwoods and the female ones. And so, and they also don't have that long of a life compared to other old growth trees. In fact, a lot of the ones in Cambridge are reaching the end of their lives because this neighborhood was built in the mid-90s. And so these trees they're dropping limbs terribly around here under the cottonwoods specifically.
Mhm.
So I think it'd be important when Mr. Vermillion is going around, with the software, seeing what the ages of these neighborhoods are so that the trees that were planted at that time across the board, what are they looking like now? What is the health of these trees? And I think that would help the residents to understand where they're at for replacing those trees or keeping those trees or whatever. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about some of the cottonwoods out here in this neighborhood for that very reason. They're looking pretty sickly, as are all the Bradford pears that were planted and have lost so many, been split in two by storms so many times. So let's see. One thing that I'd like to see is I'm not seeing a timeline. So I also don't want to rush about, an ordinance such that we get one that's not really well written. I think it'd be great if we could get a draft ordinance that uses all these other communities that you're looking closely at, like Denton, Fort Worth, Flower Mound, all the ones that are well known for having these great tree ordinances that you're speaking of. Maybe you could put something together that, to give us something to go off of. And, but in the meantime, because I know that it could take a little longer than that, perhaps a moratorium would be something that council could consider now for scraping of lots. And as well as certain, you can't take down trees that are likely going to be protected in the city. If you can give us a list of what those would be, a moratorium on bringing them down without a permit. And then I would really like Councilmember Bierman, if this is something that could be brought up to be discussed. I think this is going to take longer than when we actually get to a study session or a council conference than the typical 1 hour that we have. Maybe this is something that we could look more deeply at on retreat when you've got everybody together there. I could ask the mayor if Mr. Vermillion could have a couple hours, once we've had a chance to look at these draft ordinances and get moving on it. Otherwise, again, I think that we're looking towards a moratorium, and if people don't like the idea of a moratorium, then moving quicker would be my preference, because I don't want to wait to do anything. I don't want the default to be we're not doing anything until we have the software and GIS has mapped every tree in the city. I mean, that to me seems like a 2-year thing. And I would hate to say that we're not going to do anything about a tree ordinance for 2 years. I hope that's not what I'm hearing. Maybe I'm wrong that you can get it done quicker than that, but to me, it's not you, it's the whatever consultant that we would hire to map the city. It's probably going to take a while. So whatever is between now and then, if it's moratorium, it's moratorium. I don't really care. Let's see. I do support increasing the fines, Mr. Vermillion. I think that's a great idea. One of the other things I know on the flower mound ordinance, if you cut one down, with the permit, then you're required to plant 3 more. And it's not like babies that you can just stick in the ground. It's like a minimum of a 5-year tree or something. They're certainly not small, because you want to have the tree have a better chance of survival. So I like that about that community, that they are stricter on what goes in the ground next. So you might look at their ordinances as well.
Okay.
I just have incorporate RF 100 here, ? So I think that this definitely can go with the RF 100 discussion. Trees help us have clean air. Alley trees, what you were talking about that, my thought there was that the maintenance could be done with the resurfacing plan that we already have. If not, if complaints haven't been registered about a particular tree, obviously it'd have to be dealt with when a complaint is brought in, but maybe the plan for methodically going through those alleys and dealing with the trees could be the resurfacing plan that is already in place for dealing with the alleyways, the streets themselves. Another part that just for taking notes and thinking out loud, some months back, pre-corona, if that tells you anything, we had a discussion about construction guidelines and what to do about certain areas that, they have to put up a bond and put in their landscaping. And then once they've gotten their bond back, they basically quit watering the trees and these babies just die. So I would like to have that discussion be a part of whatever ordinance comes up as well. If that means, some sort of redress for the city, whether that's a fine or what. But obviously the intent by the city is that we're trying to establish a tree canopy citywide, as well as shade in parking lots. I mean, all of that. So I would like to have that particular issue nipped in the bud, maybe at the same time. In these other communities, I'd be curious if neighbors or residents can report when they see, someone out there that just decides to, mow down an old growth tree. How do they go about dealing with that? Because do they have permits that are available on the web for their residents, for anybody to see, like, oh, by the way, they had permission because our forester's been out there, that tree is diseased. I think that would answer a lot of complaints, try to hedge them off from the beginning. If that was open for others to see, like, yes, this is going to be happening and they went through the proper process, or no, they didn't. And thanks for letting us know. We'll send forester, to investigate or whatever.
How that happens now, people call me constantly with that question. Council members, citizens, you name it. I get told and I go out there and look at it. Thankfully, every one of them was totally okay to be removed. I don't want to have to, get mad at someone or whatever that means, but luckily people are doing it, following the ordinance. And I've contacted all the arborists that I can find that work in Norman and told them, advise your clients, they cannot just cut down a street tree without having somebody look at it first.
Okay,
Anyways.
good. I thought it might help on the telephone call end if, people knew exactly easily where to look to see if there was a permit that's been issued on a tree.
Okay.
Maybe it'd save your phone ringing quite a bit if you've issued a permit and it exists.
Good idea.
Um,
Like the Corps of Engineers has all their 404 permits, individual permits listed on their website for people to look at, just like that.
yeah, that'd be great. Big tree heading, and people know where to go. I do want to underscore that it's a minimum of a 30% canopy, not, that's not our goal. It's a minimum of that being what we want the goal to be. We want more than 30%. It's just certainly no less. And I'm going to say it again. We want to prevent the clear cutting. We don't want that to be the default. In fact, we want developers to feel like it's going to be hard to be able to clear cut. That's not what we want to do. Preserve our big trees. Yep.
Ma'am, I was talking with the Davie Resource Group lady named Dana, who wrote all the management plans for most of those towns in Texas. And she said they had a public involvement, which is integral to any kind of rollout like this. And the developers were extremely upset, but she worked it out. They said, well, we need something in exchange if we're going to encumber these or have these costs put on us. And so, there was a little give and take, but public involvement is really important to get a lot of buy-in as much as possible. And there is that public involvement spread PowerPoint is available online. Would you like to look at that, everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that you would probably be really surprised about how the public feels about trees, just judging by the conversation. I think that the buy-in, Norman loves their trees. They love their dogs. They love their trees. These are two common themes. So, but yes, absolutely. I'd love to see it.
Okay.
And yeah, just preserve the big ones. I mean, it took how long for those things to grow, and we can't, once they've cut them down, they're gone. And nobody looks at a new ornamental tree the same way as they do an aged oak or something. So, yeah, I think that's all I have. I appreciate you. I think that I can tell that you have a love for trees and for a planned community that prizes their trees and protects them. And I think you're looking at the right communities for a draft ordinance. And I'm excited about this. I just want to see us move forward in a way that it gets done in our lifetimes.
Yeah, the
Thank you.
COVID thing honestly put a real stop on and then the storm also. But I'm going to get back on this and push. I will say I get laughter from people, other tree professionals, when I mention all the things that I want to do here. And, they talk about staff. Austin has the largest urban forestry staff in the country, besides probably New York City. I cannot do all these things by myself.
Oh, I know.
Inspecting plans, inspecting preservation plans. The sorority house where they have the AstroTurf and the big live oak. She said they love to protect trees and they wanted them to protect the live oak as much as possible. But every time they would say something, it would work for a day or two, keeping machines out from underneath the tree. And then it would just, happen again and again and again. So whatever preservation, if someone tells the city they're going to preserve something and we have an ordinance that provides BMPs that they follow, and if they don't do that, then that's a problem. And something needs to be, because the house mom, she's not super aggressive type person. I can't see her out there yelling at the guys, or maybe she could, but so somebody that runs around and make sure these contractors are keeping machines and refueling and everything else out from underneath canopies, especially that live oak. It's one of the biggest live oaks in town.
Yeah.
But they need help through teeth of somehow to make it worth their while to keep the equipment away from the trees.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And so that's part of the ordinance. I would say it needs to be painful if they mess it up.
So I've been taking a lot of notes, and I don't want to. I don't want to overburden Tim, but also I want to move on to our second item on the
Yeah.
agenda
Okay, I'm
before it
good.
gets too late. So this is why I'm going to kind of run through this list, and then I have a suggestion that I'll want some feedback from at least the council members and Tim on. So moving forward, we have including trees on the earth grade permit, which is about lot scraping. Create a downsized version of that earth grade permit for lots under 1 acre. Continue moving forward on the tree canopy master plan. Kind of subcategories of that are begin development, redevelopment, tree preservation ordinance. Consider extending protections of the street tree ordinances the way Texas does with the classification of trees that we really do want, and then classifications of trees we really don't want. Historic tree designations for core Norman, stricter removal laws, fines, same for street trees. Make sure that we consider the overlap with the Center City Form-Based Code, review Historic District Commission tree plan guidelines, ensure that whatever we do applies to PUDs as well. Cottonwoods, address Cottonwoods, Eastern Red Cedars, at least the female Cottonwoods. Possible moratorium on lot scraping, historic tree removal until we have a plan in place. Consider the resurfacing plan to deal with alley volunteer trees. Address issues with the landscape bond, and then how to tackle or address the impact of construction on historic trees, possibly adding some fines, et cetera, et cetera. So this sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. And I can see Tim, the hours of his day just bleeding through his fingertips. So what I was going to suggest is, would you 3 council members and myself be interested in kind of having a working group with Tim where we can sit down and identify the parts of this that he really needs to do on his own, and then the parts of it that are kind of more background research, getting copies of the Historic District Commission, the tree plan guidelines, reviewing how this could overlap with the Center City Form-Based Code, kind of looking over these other ordinances and just trying to take some of this off of his plate so that we can move a little bit faster and maybe preclude the need for some kind of moratorium. How do you all feel about that? I got a thumbs up from Lee. See
I
Steven
love it.
nodding his head and I can't see Allison, but I assume she agrees too.
And I would like to bring in Dana from Davie. This is what she does.
Great.
I was
Okay,
gonna
great.
ask
Then maybe
if
we
that
could
legal will be
set up a
involved,
Zoom.
just
Oh,
because
yes, Catherine, yes.
run into Fifth Amendment takings claims. There's a case right now in the Sixth Circuit that's winding its way through that I'm watching, but not saying we can't do it. I just want to make sure we've got our eye on that while we write it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and of course, I mean, nothing that we, and Jane, I haven't forgotten about you either, but nothing we would do would be, kind of to circumvent any of you or bring something to council that hasn't been vetted through each of you, but just recognizing that you all have limited bandwidth and there's a lot of just background and kind of source material to go through. And so, if we can take some of that off of your hands and do some of that kind of on the side so that this could move a little bit faster, seems like we're all happy to do that.
I was just going to say we can get that information from Anais about HD and pass that
great.
along just to help out. Yeah.
And this will probably mean several meetings, probably one with Tim, one with Catherine, one with you, Jane, and just kind of, see what we can do to take some of this off of your plate, and, help us move a little bit faster on it. So, okay. Well, that sounds great. I'm going to kind of type up this list as well, Tim. I know you were taking notes, but I don't think it ever hurts to have more notes, and then I can also kind of send this around to our other council members so that they're not, surprised by what we're working on. So yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to this. I think that this is the kind of thing that can really set Norman apart. I mean, as Tim mentioned, we have some very, I don't even know if historic is the right word for it. I don't even know if legacy is the right word for it, but some Tim, my words are failing me. I mean, we have some trees here in Norman that should be as valued and as valuable as any historic monument or home or place or person that has come out of the city of Norman. And whatever we can do to protect those trees as well as our tree canopy. You know, the earlier we can do it, the more of an impact it'll have. So I'm really excited about this, and looking forward to carrying Councilmember Carter's vision to fruition on this.
I'm glad to be here.
All right. Okay, well, on that note, we're going to move on to item 2, which, if I can get my iPad to pull up so I can read the actual agenda item as written, is a discussion regarding use of public rights of way. And so before Jane/Catherine kicks this off, I'm sure none of you are surprised that this topic has come up. In the last couple months, the use of our public rights of way has become more and more of a topic of concern for residents of Norman, regardless of your political persuasion. And it's become pretty evident that our easement ordinance is really about permanent structures and political signs. So, you know, what I don't want is for the events of the last couple months to lead just any resident in Norman to think that they can just, you know, set up a tent kind of anywhere and do whatever they want in the public right of way. Maybe that is what we want, but I think this is something that we need to talk about and make sure that our easement ordinance and the use of public rights of way are done, that we create a structure for use in an intentional and, you know, possibly permitted process. So looks like, I don't know if it's going to be Jane or Catherine kind of kicking this off. Catherine, you should take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you just covered that background quite well. Tuesday night, you mentioned this meeting and talked about, you know, is this something we want to restrict on even a temporary basis for what we would allow in the public right of way? We hear the terms right of way and easement used interchangeably often, and that's usually okay, but it is kind of misleading because the underlying ownership is different. So a right of way is the public's legal right to pass through the grounds of the property, and we hold that in fee simple. Easements are just an interest in land, and it's subservient to the dominant landowner. So we don't own it in fee simple, and that can affect what we can regulate. So this is our ordinance that Councilmember Bierman mentioned, section 10205. No person shall place a structure, obstruction, or impediment within any public easement or right of way, or which impairs access to water meters. The continued existence of such structure, obstruction, or impediment constitutes a public nuisance. There are exceptions for trees, fences, shrubs that don't restrict our access or usage of the easement, right of way, or water meter. Once there is an obstruction, we are to give written notice, and the person who placed it there will have to remove it. But we do have processes in place for permanent encroachments, revocable licenses. Some neighborhoods might have a gate that encroaches into the public right of way, and they'll come forward with a revocable license. We see consents to encroach on almost at least once a month, I would think. At one of your meetings, you'll see one of these on your agenda. So those are pretty common to address issues where there may be some conflict in those areas. And there were concerns expressed about recent petition drive efforts. We had a number of phone calls from people complaining about folks in the right of way or in easements using tents to obtain signatures. This, of course, is protected speech, and so that impacts how we can really regulate it. Free speech activities in the public right of way, as long as it didn't obstruct access, we instructed that those were permitted and actually protected. In easements where we're not the underlying fee simple title owner, we said if the property owner allows you to be there and you're not obstructing our access to the easement, then that's fine. But if the property owner doesn't want you there, they can tell you to leave. One of the biggest examples of this distinction was, and probably the one we got the most complaints about, including from the manager of the store, was at OnQ. They really didn't want anyone out there collecting signatures or doing anything because they just wanted to be a neutral business, and it didn't look like they were neutral. What we did with each of these complaints is pull up the plat and see who owns what. Is it an easement? Is it right of way? They were actually in the public right of way. So Unfortunately for OnQ, we had to tell them there's nothing you can do about it. So here are the First Amendment concerns. Of course, the First Amendment to the Constitution says you cannot expressly prohibit it expressly prohibits enactment of laws that abridge freedom of speech. Cases are very fact specific. We've talked about this a number of times before, and it really depends on what type of forum you're talking about. So when it occurs on government property, that's a traditional public forum. These are streets, sidewalks, rights of way, parks. Those are areas we're constitutionally obligated to make available for free speech. You can designate public forums as well, and you'll see this, for instance, where we might allow outside groups to use council chambers for events. That means we can't say to a group we don't like, no, you can't use it. We've made that a limited public forum, and we've got to treat everyone equally and allow access regardless of whether we like the speech. And then non-public forums are all remaining government property. So in a traditional public forum like a sidewalk or street or park, you can regulate speech, but you have to meet certain requirements. Generally, you're going to want that regulation to be content neutral. If it's not neutral, it brings you into a different level of scrutiny that's much more harder to overcome. It has to be a time, place, or manner restriction that's reasonable. It has to serve an important government interest and leave open adequate alternative spaces for speech. If you have a permitting process for the use of these public forums, they have to serve an important purpose, give clear criteria to the permitting authority that leaves almost no discretion, and provide procedural safeguards. You have to, have a time frame you're going to review that. You can't just sit on an application that you don't like for months. You have to have a means of appeal, preferably judicial review, things like that. And then the regulation has to be narrowly tailored to achieve the government's purpose. And I'll talk in a minute about some specific cases. As I said, this is always very fact specific, just why it's probably one of my favorite areas of the law, because it's really interesting, but it's also, it can be more difficult to predict. So like I said, cases are fact specific. You could have an ordinance that's unconstitutional on its face. So regardless of how it's applied, it's just not going to work. Or more often the case, you have an ordinance that looks okay on paper, but how it's applied gets you into trouble. In regards to political speeches, particularly, there are a number of cases out there that talk about how this is core speech, and legislative restrictions on that advocacy is at odds with the guarantees of the First Amendment. So that's something to keep in mind as we try to address these issues. So here's just a few examples. I mean, there's hundreds, thousands of them out there, but a statute that prohibited loitering in a public place for the purpose of begging was struck down. Begging is a constitutionally protected First Amendment right. A city ordinance prohibiting structures in the right-of-way was not narrowly tailored enough to serve the city's interests in keeping the right-of-way cleared. They applied this to the use of a balloon. I'm assuming it's a hot air balloon, but I did not look at the type, by labor union protesters. A statute and ordinance prohibiting placement of pamphlets on vehicles that were parked in public streets is constitutionally protected. This is a really recent case out of Oklahoma City that is fascinating in our office for a number of reasons. One, they're just up the road, but two, our staff happened to be at the 10th Circuit arguing a different case at the same time this was being argued. And so they got to hear the arguments. We were taking bets on who was going to win. I think most of us probably lost the bet. The plaintiffs were represented by a couple of local attorneys here in Norman. Professor Ty from the law school. I don't know if you ever had him, Councilmember Patron. I took First Amendment for him, and he's awesome. And Michael Salem, who's a well-known First Amendment attorney here in Norman. They found some residents who were joggers, some panhandlers, some political party activists, and a news outlet. I think it was Red Dirt Report, and used them as plaintiffs to sue Oklahoma City over an ordinance they adopted that prohibited standing, staying, or sitting in public medians. This was, quietly called the Panhandling Ordinance. This was their second attempt at a panhandling ordinance. This ordinance was all about public safety. They had a bunch of recitals talking about all of the recs and the CDC recommendations, and how there are really good safety reasons not to allow people to stand or sit in the median. So it restricted that, not to every median, but to medians where streets had a speed limit of 40 miles per hour or more, based on some CDC and some Highway Administration research that they produced. They had exceptions for government employees and people crossing the street, people performing legally authorized work, and people responding to emergencies. And as I said, they relied heavily on public safety justifications. So the court said just 2 weeks ago, I think, medians are traditional public forums, so it's that higher scrutiny. Joggers talking to each other in the median is protected speech. There was no proof, they felt, that the public safety claims that Oklahoma City used to justify the ordinance were real, or that the ordinance would even alleviate those harms if they were real. They couldn't cite an instance in Oklahoma City where someone would have been hit as a result of being in the median. And so that's, the attorney for Oklahoma City passionately argued we shouldn't have to wait for someone to die, but that still wasn't good enough for the court. It was not narrowly tailored to the city's legitimate interest in public safety. The city didn't demonstrate that there were other less burdensome alternatives that would not achieve median safety, and the city failed to establish that the ordinance left sufficient alternate channels for citizens to communicate. So that's the kind of analysis here in the 10th Circuit that we're up against. Honestly, this makes me a little nervous about the other case we were arguing the same day. We still haven't gotten that ruling. But just in summary, public rights of way, whether it's the sidewalk, the street, a median, they're traditional public forums. So if we look at regulating this, it's got to be content neutral. It's got to be a reasonable restriction of time, place, and manner only. And then it's got to be narrowly tailored to protect government's interests. And what the 10th Circuit is saying in this case is that interest cannot be theoretical. And so this case, having just come out, was very timely for this discussion. I wanted to highlight it because it's just up the road. It's in our circuit. And it gives us a tough hill to climb, I think, for some good regulations to address some of the conduct that you all are concerned about. So I just wanted to throw that out there to start the discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Catherine, I first have a question about this case specifically. Do you think Oklahoma City's argument was at all undermined by the fact that they had tried this previously and were less narrowly tailored?
Possibly. They did get into the court record all of those previous efforts from 2015 on, and the court noted how it had been called a panhandling ordinance until it went for adoption, and the police chief had conveniently renamed it to a median safety ordinance, I'm sure on the advice of his counsel. And so the court did look at all that. They knew the history, but I think the language of this ordinance just wasn't enough to overcome the scrutiny, regardless of what had happened in the past. I think the safety issue really needed to have more meat on it in order for the court to buy it, and which that was the part that was surprising to us. We kind of agree. Why would we wait for someone to die? Right.
Well, and I think I one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up was because there actually was a very significant car accident over on the west side on the last night of this petition gathering effort, when they had the party, when they were celebrating their intended outcome. There was a pretty significant accident at that intersection, and people who were there on both sides dropped everything and ran to help. It was a really nice moment of solidarity in what had been a very difficult month. But several people who were there were not surprised that this accident happened, because there was so much distracting activity and tents and things that were very close to the road and really right in the intersection, when you really need to be focusing on the intersection. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, and one of the reasons why I have wanted to talk about this, is because not only, as I'm sure we all did, got a number of questions and comments and feedback about the use of our rights of way in this particular way. But I also got a number of questions and notes of concern from people who were concerned about how differently the recall petition group, how differently our existing ordinance was applied versus some of our local protests that have happened over the last few years. Thinking about the Yes All Daughters marches and protests from a few years ago, where I had multiple people come up to me and say, why are these signature gatherers not asked to keep moving? Because we were always told that we had the right to use the city's rights of way to march and to make our case and speak our piece, but we were always told we had to keep moving. And that was always made very clear to us by every single officer who was there to monitor us and protect us. It was always made crystal clear that we could not just set up shop at an intersection, that we had to keep moving. And so that's really kind of the aim that I was hoping to make with an ordinance, because I agree that it has to be content neutral. I don't care if you're collecting signatures for a local effort, for a state effort, or if all you want to do is set up a tent and sell tacos. The problem is that what we have done is allowed basically complete unfettered access to our rights of way, and outside of the site triangle, there is still an issue with just allowing unrestricted use. And so maybe there's a different way to do it. I certainly don't want to restrict anyone's free speech. I don't mind if you want to march up and down a sidewalk, with a clipboard with a petition on it, or with a sign that says, I hate city government, or with a sign that says selling tacos or clothes or books or disc golf discs or whatever else someone might want to just set up shop and sell on the side of the road for. So I don't see an issue with the content. But I do have an issue with how our ordinance has been applied to different groups, our existing ordinance to different groups, and also what this might mean for future use of our right of way by anyone. So I don't know if any other council member has some feedback on that. I see that Allison's Councilmember Patron's hand is up. I wasn't sure if it was still up from the previous topic or if she has some.
It was up from the previous topic, but I mean, I certainly do have thoughts on a lot of this. But we'll see what Catherine has to say. Follow up, let her make comments on what you just said, because I'd be interested in her thoughts.
Sure, no problem.
I think what we've advised is you can't block the sidewalk. And so if you have a large group of protesters that are blocking the sidewalk because they're standing in the right of way, then we would tell them to keep moving. This happened also with the anti-abortion protesters in front of Norman High several years ago. And we said that we can't keep them from being there, but they can't block your access to the sidewalk. And so in situations in this recent example where we got asked about these, we were looking at whether it was easements or public right of way. And then we were looking at whether or not they were blocking the sidewalk.
Yeah, I'm thinking mostly of the tents that were set up, so basically what you're saying is in this example, the anti-abortion protester could have just stepped onto the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the road, and it would have been perfectly fine.
Right.
Okay. Well, I certainly don't know the exact details of the situations with the other marches or protests, and the particular details of that. But I do see some utility in us making sure that just someone at any time can't just go and set up, a tent every single day in a public right of way and sell things, or, again, petitions, or, whatever the case may be, because I don't know if you saw the video of it, because there were multiple videos of that accident over at 36th and Main. But it was pretty bad. And, a number of people there were like, not surprised that this happened, because it was a circus over at that intersection. You had both sides talking at each other and waving signs at each other. And, it caused a lot of distraction at that intersection. And so because it's so close to the road, to me, that's where a lot of the problem comes in, is because they're not further back, beyond, behind the sidewalk. I'm using in front of and behind the sidewalk to mean closest to the road in front of. Behind the sidewalk is closest to whatever business it is. that we have some issue there. And when this is happening in multiple locations all over town, it starts to catch people's eyes more and more and more. And, you know, I just worry about, I guess I can't even say it's a loophole because that's just what we've allowed, but, you know, the recognition that if you can just set up shop in the right of way, as long as you pack your 12-foot tent down every single day, you know, I just don't know if that's really what we want as use of that space, especially when it comes to on busy streets. So Councilmember Patron is waving her hand again.
So yeah, I guess, Catherine, has the court at all seen any difference in what Kate's talking about as far as the median next to the road and behind the sidewalk, especially for site triangle areas?
I haven't looked at site triangles specifically, but I was just making a note to do that because I could see maybe a better public safety argument there, and that would leave other means to other alternate forms of communication along the sidewalk if you just got them out of the site triangle. That doesn't fix all the situations for sure. But
well, I mean, I actually am protective of, believe it or not, I mean, I actually am protective of their right to do this. So, but we don't, site triangles to me are a different issue, especially when you have crosswalks right in the area and you're allowing right turn on red. It's problematic that people can get hit. And so that for me is, especially kids,
yes,
are short.
That's a huge concern.
So little short people that might be crossing, that's an issue for me. But to do it, I mean, I have, you know, whatever, if they can, for me, that's not a problem to me. But I have a feeling that, you know, the flip side of this is the decisions that have been coming down recently regarding, you know, like homeless populations and stuff like that. So if, you know, certainly political speech is protected, but we've also been seeing the same for, you know, constitutional rights afforded to homeless population. So is this something that we can presume now that, okay, well, we're going to allow, you know, tents in the median for petition signature gathering. If they have an easy up tent, which many of them do, that they can set one up there every day too, because they have the same constitutional rights that somebody else does. If they just, and if they say, well, it's got to be political speech. So if they've got a political sign.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be speech or expressive conduct beyond sleeping. I will say though, there is a case out there, and I want to say it's probably Seattle, where they have a ban on sleeping on the sidewalk. And the court said it was unconstitutional.
Yeah, that was overturned.
You can't sleep on the sidewalk in front of the mayor's house. It ended up being overturned.
Yeah, it was overturned. So, and that was the sidewalk. So that's what we're talking about even more when you're saying you can't block the sidewalk. Well, if you're sleeping on it, you can.
Yeah.
So
there's probably other ADA implications there too, but that would concern me. But yeah, I mean,
I certainly find it concerning as well. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that this cuts both ways. So certain issues that, you know, one person might find compelling with political speech, but they don't find compelling with homelessness, or, you know, I mean, there are so many issues out there that span the gamut. So I think that if we're going to take a look at this and we're going to say that, you know, it's just got, what Kate is getting at is what I completely agree with. It's got to be equal. And if we're going to tell yes, all daughters, or whatever the hot group is, you know, that's people are worried about of the day, that they have to keep moving, but we're not going to tell another one that they have to keep moving, that they can set up an easy up and lawn chairs, then the city needs to be ready for lawsuits because they aren't treating groups the same.
Yeah,
so we need to.
The distinction is where they were set up. The ones I've seen anyway, in this most recent effort, the tents and the chairs were set up in the grass portion of the right of way, not on the sidewalk. So passage was still accessible. And I think that's probably the distinction when it gets applied that way.
So it's okay for anyone to set up doing anything they want for the day in the grass part between the street and the sidewalk.
If it's protected speech in a traditional public forum, it's going to be very difficult to regulate it, except to time.
I'm okay with that, just as long as that's, I mean, as long as we're consistent, I don't mind. I mean, so if anybody wants to go set up whatever it is they want to set up in front of Fan, I mean, I would hope that that's a site triangle issue, you know, but, and if I'm Fan, I would hope that I have some sort of say so, because it would to be that business that, you know, they're blocking, for one, the view of the business, but it also looks like you're affiliated with that business. And I know some of the businesses, you know, were worried about that, but that's just an example from recent memory. This is going forward. So whatever it might be going forward, we don't have any ordinances against blocking a site triangle. We don't have any ordinances that's, you know, if anything, we have allowed it for a month straight. So anyone who goes and sets up now, they're going to say, look, you know, however many people called in before, it was never a problem. So I should be able to set up here too. And is that something that council has anything to do with at all?
Without changing the ordinance, that would be the case. If you change the ordinance, then I think any new activity would be analyzed for the new ordinance.
Does the city have any liability if there was a fatality and, you know, it is in a site triangle and we've allowed them to be there?
I don't think so, because I don't think we have much of a choice but to allow them based on these cases that don't seem to have much regard for the public safety argument without examples of incidences.
Okay.
I mean, even with it already happening on the west side, I mean, I don't know that anyone would be willing to admit that they were distracted by what was happening on the side of the road, at least not anyone involved in the accident, especially. But there, I mean, there were people who were there who were not surprised that an accident happened. And one had even commented to the person she was with when they were standing with their sign saying, I would be shocked if someone didn't get in an accident with all the ridiculousness that's going on at this intersection. So, you know, I mean, and I don't know, again, I don't know. I would love to see Oklahoma City's, the version of the ordinance that was struck down, and then the prior version of the ordinance that they tried to pass. Because I do think that the site triangle in particular, because we already have that included, you know, at least for political signs, I would imagine that the reason why the political sign ordinance hasn't been challenged and lost in court when it comes to the site triangle in particular, is because it's valid, or just no one's gotten spicy about it yet. But I mean, that's also another example that we can use. If we already don't allow political signs in the site triangle for this exact purpose, because it blocks the ability of drivers to see where they're turning and to see oncoming traffic. And so, you know, I think that that's certainly one avenue we can go, is maintain the integrity of that site triangle, whether it's a political sign or a tent, because a tent is certainly going to be more obstructive than just a political sign.
Yeah, that's something we can look at, and I can send out the ordinance. It's worth noting, I think the original ordinance that Oklahoma City had was also struck down just at the district court level, and so then they revised it, but it required a permit if you were going to be in the right of way, and I think they felt like that was too risky, and so they struck that down and then tried this other route. I'll send that to you today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
and
as far as I'm
Hall,
concerned,
I saw your hand come up too. So
yeah, to me the sorry, I just wanted to say, to me, the site triangle is a big deal. I mean, I can't, especially when there's a crosswalk, you literally cannot see. And you're going 1 mile an hour to try to get around that curve, and it's scary. Mm-hmm. But if they are allowed to do it, they're allowed to do it. I'd just be consistent.
I agree. Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, really all I was going to say is that I do think it's really important that it's applied equally all across the board. And I do think that the site triangle, I mean, I've been following this Oklahoma City case as well, and I find it really intriguing because, I mean, there is a public safety aspect to this. I mean, when you have one person that's in the right of way in the pizza costume, that's one thing, but most of the activity that we saw on both sides, I'm going to try to remain really neutral about this, but on both sides, I mean, you have a large gathering of people that are expressly trying to distract you to get notice. And so to me, that is a public safety feature. So if we can, investigate the side triangle piece, I'd be interested in doing that. And then Councilmember Bierman, you also brought up something about selling. So I think what we've been focused on is protecting free speech. So can anybody conduct commerce and sell things in a right of way?
Yes, potentially. It's subject to any other licensing or permitting, but there are some cases that talk about that too.
Okay, so anybody can pretty much do anything in a city right of way.
Potentially, yeah. And like I said, the cases are really fact specific.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes it so challenging.
Yeah.
But I was reading a case today about someone selling in the right of way, and the court struck down the ordinance.
And have we had any particular complaints about that type of thing?
Not that I can think of.
Because people selling rugs, bonsai trees, shrimp, all kinds of things that appear to be on city right of way. So that's permitted.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, some of them I know are in parking lots of businesses, so they've gotten the businesses permission for that. But yeah, I mean especially the way our ordinance is written, as long as you're not erecting a permanent structure, there's
like
nothing
why pay
in our,
rent?
right?
I mean,
Right.
why pay rent? Like, why wouldn't?
Yeah,
I hope people are listening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
There's
I don't
no
know
reason to rent out a place to go set up your business. You can just go set it up in the lawn in front of any other business. Use their advertising.
Right. So, I mean, and that's concerning to me. And just because it hasn't really happened with much regularity yet, it doesn't mean that it won't. I mean, and I do believe that we have at least some semblance of a street vendor license of some kind. So, I know that there's some potential impact to, stop them from doing that based on the fact that they may or may not have a street vendor license. But yeah, I mean, there's really not much in our ordinance that prevents them from doing that right now.
Yeah, and that licensing is really the time, place, and manner restriction.
Mm-hmm.
That we can do.
Okay.
Things like that. So
I
I mean,
think it's very rare, but I think it's very rare to see sales, the ones you're describing, that I've seen. We're very sensitive to it in public works. I can't think of a case where there was a sale of a retail product, that sort of thing. I can think of lots of cases where Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and cheerleader groups are selling car washes and that sort of thing, but what they're doing is behind the right-of-way line. They might be on the sidewalk with their signs, but rarely are they conducting that business in the right-of-way. You got to realize the right-of-way is really very narrow. The typical right-of-way line is 1 foot behind the sidewalk. So even though there's green space, that green space belongs to that parcel, that corner parcel.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, because I do find it interesting that, we, at least so far, successfully can use the site triangle for political signs that are much less distracting than some of the other kinds of activity that we've seen.
Yeah, and I really think, I mean, boiling it down to the site triangle, to me, would be a good first place to start, because it is something that we already have established policy on, as Councilmember Hall said, for things that are not nearly as distracting as someone with a 12-foot easy up tent who is intending on distracting you, because that's part of why they're there. They want your attention. So I want to let Councilmember Holman, I saw his hand go up. Also, if you don't mind putting your hands down once you no longer have additional comments to make. We don't have Brenda here monitoring this for me, so I'm gonna have to ask you to do it yourselves.
Good afternoon, Lisa. This is Daryl Pyle over at the city.
Daryl, you are not muted.
if you can call me at your convenience, I'll give you my cell number. It's area
Daryl,
code
stop. Daryl, stop.
358
Daryl,
5226. I have a question about a couple of dates in October or some space.
I think he muted us. There we go.
Cell phone number.
Thank you. I tried to talk over it so that you didn't.
I did too.
Sorry, Councilmember Hall. Please continue.
Wow, that was exciting. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, we are really very effective at enforcing the political sign piece.
Yeah, we are.
And, you know, I'd say residents in Norman are really sensitive to that, and they pick up the phone as fast as they can to make sure those signs go away, and they do. So we've been very successful at enforcing that.
Right. And I certainly don't see any reason why this wouldn't be similar, at least on weekdays. I still would love to kind of get an answer to the issue that we have on weekends with code enforcement not working on weekends. Oftentimes, I mean, especially with Tuesday elections, it makes for a very busy Monday and Tuesday for code enforcement because a whole ton of signs, you know, pop up over the weekend and, you know, get to sit there all weekend. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to let Councilmember Holman weigh in, but Catherine, I really think that looking at the site triangle is going to be the way to go. I'm sure Councilmember Holman will have his words of wisdom, as he always does.
Thank you. So really I would absolutely agree with pretty much all the comments I've heard from all of you so far. And one of the issues about retail or things being sold in the right of way is there is one example at Cedar Lane, Highway 77 on the northwest corner. About every 6 months or so, I get text messages from residents of Eagle Cliff and Cedar Lane about a pretty large, I don't know, rummage sale that gets like a pop-up that happens right there on that corner. The property's owned, it has a big for sale sign in it, or at least the broker that's trying to sell it anyway. And there's a big old barn or shed in the back of it. And it's, people also use it to cut through when they don't want to wait at the light at Cedar Lane and Highway 77. People will sometimes drive through this property because there is a curb cut on both sides. So that's an issue. But there is this pop-up shop that sets up sometimes. And the most recent picture I was sent from a resident was in August 18th. So it doesn't happen very often, but they have sometimes set up all their cables on the sidewalk and blocked it completely. In the most recent time, the picture I saw didn't show them blocking the sidewalk this time, but a lot of residents have asked me about the legality of that over the years, especially when they were in the right-of-way area. But anyway, that is just one example I kind of have known about. It's been reoccurring in Ward 7 when it comes to using the right-of-way for stuff like that. But I would agree with all the comments about just a general regard for safety. I'd be concerned with anybody hanging out in the median of really busy streets. I think what Oklahoma City was maybe the intent of the streets being over 40 miles per hour. I think that made sense, but I think it really did hurt them based on the history of that ordinance that they had proposed and what it had been labeled clearly before. So, but I mean, I would definitely not encourage people to hang out in the medians of busy streets or on the corners of busy streets either. But it seems like we're pretty limited on what we can actually do. But I would agree that anything we do should be make sure that it's evenly applied to everybody, that it's being evenly enforced on everyone as well. Not just if it's groups the city agrees with or not agrees with and things like that. So whatever we have has to be equal. So that's my thoughts on it. Thanks.
No, I appreciate that. And, I think one thing that I would like to see kind of moving forward, regardless of whether or not it's with this or just with our existing ordinance, is some guidance. So, if we are telling the anti-abortion protester or the Black Lives Matter group or the, we want schools to shut down so that we can all be safe from COVID rally, that if they're on the sidewalk and they're told to move, to tell them to move to the right of way. And that with the exception of sight triangles, because I hope that we are moving down those lines, that's where they can do what their best version of a protest or a rally or whatever it is that they're doing. Because if that is the case, we have had a little bit of, I guess I would call it shades of gray in enforcement, where we tell them that they have to keep moving, but not that if they just stepped onto the grass between the sidewalk and the street, that they could then stand. So, I'd like to ensure that whatever we do, that we are enforcing it equally across the board and not just failing to mention something that they could do, where they could move to do their protest or march or rally in exactly the way that they want to. But Catherine, I do think I'd like to look into the sight triangle piece in particular, because we do already have existing ordinance on the books that talks about the sight triangle and protecting the sight triangle for the very reasons that several council members have mentioned. Because I do think that's the most concerning aspect, particularly considering what happened at 36th and Main. It scared a lot of people who were there that night. So, that's the one, when you have right on red, when you have crosswalks, I think that's really going to be the key. That's where the majority of the impact is happening. When it's just on a straight roadway and you just happen to plunk your tent down on the right of way, not really as much of an issue, but you're also not getting as much of an impact for whatever you're setting up to do. So I think that everyone gravitates towards the sight triangle for a reason, but we also have ordinances on the books regarding sight triangle for a reason. So, I guess maybe let's circle back with this next month and kind of see where we can go with it. And yeah, but I think that's really good feedback. I'm glad that you were able to find the cases that you found, and that the courts decided to hustle up and get something done for us to kind of use as some guidance this time.
Yeah, that was good timing.
Yes, it was. So I don't really have anything else. I think that's about it. I will circle back with each of you, council members Patrone, Hall, and Holman, to see if we can set up a date. I guess maybe to meet with Tim first to talk about stuff on the tree ordinance, and then we can kind of spread out and talk to Jane and Catherine and kind of get the ball rolling on some of these things. So
I'd be down to do it. Like, again, we're going to be together over retreat.
Yes.
So maybe if you wanted to chat for a minute about that topic, I don't know, just
sure.
thought. And in the meantime,
I'm
getting my
will be
calendar
after our
out.
next meeting. That'll be after our October oversight meeting.
Oh,
retreat.
okay. Never mind.
So it's a
So
little bit
then.
further down the road than I think that you want to wait.
No,
so.
yeah, I don't want to wait that long.
Okay.
But
So yeah,
in the
let's try and
meantime,
get some. Go ahead. Sorry.
In the meantime, I'm going to be getting my calendar out because I'm planning on selling some stuff on the side of the road.
Okay.
Now
I've
that I know
got
I
I've got a 10-foot pop-up that you can
I've got some old cell phones I'm ready to get rid of. With a jacket. The watches.
Well, I'm not
feeling
gonna say who it
salty
is
today.
because I don't want to embarrass him, but someone I spent a little bit of time with today for a meeting has a leopard jacket from back when the old lumberyard building was a clothing store, and he still has it. So that we might be able to do a little vintage Norman clothing sale.
That'd be fun.
Yes, it would.
I've got some stuff.
So Jane, if you could send us what you've got from the Historic District Commission, from the tree plan guidelines, and I think everything else we'll probably be getting from Tim. Oh, any Center City form-based code stuff we need to look at as it relates to trees or clear cutting, things like that. And then I'll get with Sean, who is no longer on the call, but I will get with him about the earth grade permit, so we can kind of see what that looks like, and then we can kind of start having start having a working group and try and move some of this stuff a little further down the line so that we actually have something concrete to talk about at our retreat next month. And yes, maybe Tim can go.
I'll get that earth change permit and send that with the HD.
Thank you. Thank you. That would be great. And so, yeah, so then maybe by the time we do get to our retreat, we'll have something a little more concrete to kind of go off of. We can have an update on this next month as well. And yeah, I don't want to overload the October calendar too much because we are going to have our retreat right after that. So, I don't want to, pursue something brand new or really dive too deep on other things that we've had pending until we get to that retreat. But that'll give us an opportunity to have updates on both of these and bring them to the retreat with all of our new faces that we'll have at that retreat. Okay. Councilmember Patron, did you have something else? Oh, I just saw your hand was kind of up there, so I just didn't know if you. So, all right. Well, I think that's it. And now that we have successfully prevented Daryl from publicizing his phone number over the Zoom call, you were live and unmuted when you were leaving that voicemail for Lisa a little while ago, Daryl. So
we were
Allison and I were just trying to talk over you so your phone number wasn't broadcast to the entire world listening.
Pretty funny.
I think that's it for today. So I appreciate you all. And once we get that stuff from Jane, we'll be able to schedule a working group meeting for next week. And Ellie, come here. Come say hi. Come here. You're crying. Can you say hi to all of Mama's friends? You say hi.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi, don't cry. It's all good.
Oh, we don't need to cry. You're too pretty
It'll
to
be
cry.
okay. It'll be okay. I'll be out in just a minute, okay? All right. She's
All
got
right.
excellent timing. All right, y'all. Have a good night. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.